And I have time for us to get started this morning. I'm having trouble getting my tongue started. It must be something with the weekend. Good to see everyone that's here. We'll be talking about Jochebed this morning. Jochebed. So you can be turning to the book of Exodus. That's where we find her, Exodus chapter 2. We'll be there in just a moment. Before we do that, let's go to God in prayer. Our God and Father in heaven, we are ever thankful for all that we have for this day and this time, especially now, Father, that we can come study from your word and then offer praise and worship to you. Father, we pray for all those who are ill, that if it be your will, they'll be healed and return to health. We pray for those providing care for them, that they will do the things that are most needed and most comforting. Father, we pray for our first responders and for our military, that as they protect us in this day and this time, that they in turn will be protected and return to their families. Father, we pray for our country and for our leaders, that we as a nation might look to you and do the things that are pleasing in your sight. And Father, we pray for each of us as Christians and as the church, that no matter what may happen around us, we may hold fast to your ways, that we look to you for guidance, and that we might be protected in this world, living as you desire and calling more into your kingdom. We ask all these things in your Son's name. Amen. Jochebed, someone we don't see her named here as we begin to look in Exodus 2. But Jochebed is the mother of Aaron, Moses, and Miriam. So a very important woman. And here we have a woman much like Shiphrah and Puah, who we just looked at, who will not follow the edict that Pharaoh has put out. By this time, she has two children we know of, Miriam and Aaron, who were both older than Moses, and Moses is born. The command from Pharaoh has already been put out that male children are to be killed. Instead of that, she keeps them alive, as we see, and we'll look at the account a little more, but for 3 months before putting in the river. And then he is found by Pharaoh's daughter, and we'll look at the details of that. But we understand by doing that, you save Moses' life. And really, we see the providence of God at work through Jochebed and through Moses. And you think about this, one of the key things, and I think it's where we started to talk about Jochebed last week. Think about what she taught Moses as he was young that caused Moses later on to refuse, as we're going to see in the sermon today, it just times out right, to refuse to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter and to rather suffer affliction with the Hebrews. And so think about when she had to do that, because we know as Moses aged, just to give the idea of the life of Jochebed, you have Moses born, hidden for those first 3 months, then placed into the river. Miriam watches over him. Pharaoh's daughter finds him. She knows she needs the young child cared for. Miriam calls his own mother to take care of him. He's raised, he's weaned. He then goes into Pharaoh's house and attends all the schools of the Egyptians, learning to be a leader of a nation. And so we see that picture put there of Jochebed. Think about when she had to teach him what he needed to know. We see later on the idea of not only did she do Moses, but think about raising Aaron and Miriam and what this became to the nation of Israel during the Exodus itself. So we see a great woman coming here. Jochebed is also among the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11. She may not be listed by name, but Moses' parents, who were they? Herself and her husband was a man by the name of Amram. So Amram and Jochebed. Thinking about this now, let's look at Exodus chapter 2, and let's look at the first 10 verses. Our introduction, as it would be, to Jochebed. And there went a man of the house of Levi, and took to wife a daughter of Levi. And the woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him 3 months. And when she could no longer hide him, she took him for an ark of bulrushes, and daubed it in the slime and with pitch, and put the child therein, and she laid it in the flags by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off, to wit what would be done to him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river, and her maidens walked along by the river's side. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the babe wept. And she had compassion on him, and said, This is one of the Hebrews' children. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee? And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said unto her, Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I will give thee thy wages. And the woman took the child and nursed it, and the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, and she said, Because I drew him out of the water. And so we see the picture here of Jochebed introduced. What's really interesting, do you notice as we read the account, what names were used? You never had the father identified. You have a man of Levi. You have that he married a daughter of Levi, that the woman conceived, that there was a sister involved, but no name, that the daughter of Pharaoh is involved, but no name. When's the only name that's used within those first 10 verses? Moses. Why might that be? And we're going to make an application to Jochebed we don't think about. Why might that be? What was the central message of the passage? How Moses got to the position he's in. Did anything else really matter? Now, is it very important that Moses had a mother? Well, absolutely. How important was it that, you think about that question, how important was it that you had a mother? Well, without one, what would you not be? Therefore, it's important. Why not name her? Because the concentration's on who? Now, do you think that, and I don't know that Jochebed was alive when this was written, but it was written by Moses in inspiration at least. Think about Moses at the moment. Do you think he might have felt a little bit of this? Why am I not naming my mother? Now, she is named later. You get over to chapter 6 just to show it. Go over to chapter 6, down about verse 20. It tells us, And Amram took Jochebed, his father's sister, to wife, and she bare him Aaron and Moses, and the years of the life of Amram were 137 years. So when we get over to the genealogy, it is spelled out that the mother and father of Moses are Amram and Jochebed. But imagine being Moses, and you are writing this under inspiration. Why would God not have you name your own mother here? Really, probably, and you think about Moses and what it did in his life, how important would his mother have been to him? You know, we get to the book of Hebrews and you read about Moses, who wasn't willing to accept being the daughter or the son of Pharaoh's daughter. By being the son of Pharaoh's daughter, what did it make Moses? Literally. You get that title of the movie, Prince of Egypt. There's absolutely nothing wrong with the title of that movie. Why? What was Moses? He is the Prince of Egypt. He is in line for the throne. You think about what that would have been and how tempting that would have been, but he had been taught somewhere by someone that it was more important to be a Hebrew than to be the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Where'd that come from? Most likely his mother, the one who raised him, as we read here in verse 10, till he was old enough to take into the palace. Now you see providence of God involved. But think about that. Mothers, sometimes what do we have to Well, fathers have to do it too, so it's hard for me to say mothers, we, but mothers, what do you have to do sometimes with your children for them to be able to advance as children? Get in the what? Here's Jochebed, get in the background. We took Rebecca down to UAB for her orientation, which I found strange that orientation said we don't absolutely require it, but strongly encourage at least one parent to attend. I'm sitting there going, when I went to college orientation, it was 1 hour in one room in one building, and you figured out the rest on your own. And there was no invitation for your parents. But while we're sitting in that orientation, there was a mother that actually asked, well, how am I going to know what my son, in this case, needs to do while he's in classes if I don't get this information? And you sit there going, what are you doing? You need to get in the background, Mom. And you started to hear the person who's answering the question, doing the presentation that day, biting their tongue, because you know what they want to say is, your child is over 18 now. They are absolutely and only responsible for themselves. They're trying to be very diplomatic about it. Jochebed, why did God not name her at this point? Why does Moses write the way he does by inspiration? She's getting where? In the background, because who is the one that needs to come to the forefront at this moment? Moses, the one who's going to lead the children of Israel out. And so you see that kind of picture. You think about how she did this in her life. She didn't stay at the river, but she sent Miriam to watch over it. Miriam knew who to go and get, and then she was introduced and allowed to nursemaid Moses under Pharaoh's daughter, teaching him what he needed to know. You ever thought about the providence of God at work here? God has Moses born, able to be hidden for 3 months, then placed into a river where the daughter of Pharaoh just happens to be coming and find him, who then has a sister watching over him who just knows exactly who to call to nurse Moses till he's old enough to go into the palace, which is what we see there at verse 10. And do you notice that God is preparing Moses already? Has Moses had a hard time as a 3-month-old? Yeah, he's had to learn to what? You don't think about Moses, but can you imagine being 3 months old, somebody puts you in the river and they have enough trust and confidence in God? What do you think one of the first things that his mother, when he began to understand, in this case Hebrew language, what do you think one of the first stories he heard was? Let me tell you, son, how you got to where you are now. And that he understood that. And she would tell him that account. That's part of preparing him. What is Moses going to have to do in about 40 years? Leave Egypt and go into the wilderness. Trust in God. His mom's already given him a point of being able to do that. You think about the providence now that's indicated through the daughter of Pharaoh. His mother raises him and then turns him over to the daughter of Pharaoh. What does he learn while he's in the palace? Everything he needs to know to do a what? Lead a nation. What do you think the princes of Egypt were taught? And by the way, that's not a long and drawn out here in the scriptures. You think about that, he probably knew who his mother was, the woman who had raised and nursed him. He probably kept some contact there, but he is taught how to run a nation. But think about that teaching when you get into verse 11 and following. Think about how Jochebed has influenced his life, that even though he's now been taken into the palace, when it says, and it came to pass in those days, when Moses was grown, that he went out unto his brethren and looked on their burdens, and spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. How old was Moses at this point? He's 40 years old, basically. That's what it means for him to be grown. And he looked, and when he saw there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And he went out the second day, and behold, two of the Hebrews strove, and Moses questions them. They call him, and in verse 14, who are you to judge over us? Where did Moses learn that these Hebrews were brethren and shouldn't be fighting with each other? Do you think that was taught in the schools of Egypt? You're up in the palace. Yeah, when you see the slaves out there, they shouldn't be fighting with each other. They ought to be nice to each other. You think that was in class in one of those? No. In fact, for the slaves part, it was probably in the quote, quote, military class, and it was, when you have to lay a burden on them, you give them a burden. And so you see a difference here. Moses getting this information. Moses now has to flee and go to Midian. Where did Moses learn enough to have trust in God to flee the nation of Egypt, where he was a prince? Do you think that Moses would have been found guilty being basically a son of Pharaoh for the crime of even killing another Egyptian? All he would have had to say probably to get out of it was he went against Pharaoh's orders, and that would have been enough. But Moses doesn't do that. Moses flees. Moses goes to Midian, and we know he spends about 40 years there learning to be a shepherd. Providence of God. A mother at 3 months willing to let him go, able to give him that story as he grows up. He grows within this. He gets this training. He's now able to flee for safety to another place where he spends 40 years learning to be a shepherd. What is it he's going to do with Israel when they come out in the Exodus? Where are they going to be living? In the wilderness, as they go from Egypt to the promised land. Think about God now through Jochebed preparing Moses, and Moses' continual preparation because of that through providence. He's trained in how to lead a nation. He's given the finest education in the Egyptian schools. God now has him, much like when he had to go into the basket at 3 months, at age 40 having to flee for safety, but in that safety learning what? How to survive in the wilderness. And the reason I say this and bring it back to Jochebed for a moment, not because of his learning in the wilderness, but on that day when he was out there tending the sheep and up on the mountain, he saw a bush that burned but was not consumed. And when God called out of that, how did Moses have any idea who God was? You ever thought of that? Think about it. Chapter 3, Moses kept the flock of Jethro, it says. In verse 2, it says, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. Moses, of course, says, I'm going to go see this great sight. Verse 4, and the Lord saw that he turned aside. God called unto him out of the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. He said, draw not thy nigh thither. Put off thy shoes from thy feet, for where you are is holy ground. Verse 6, moreover, I am the God of thy father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. How would Moses have any idea who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was? What do you think part of that teaching his mother did that we read about back in verse 10? And the child grew, and she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter. What had his mother already taught him? There's a God. God's going to come for us one day. Moses had an idea who God was thanks to his mother. And so we see that picture, and Moses is then equipped. Think about how God used Jochebed even further for providence. Who becomes Moses in the picture given for going to Pharaoh? Moses becomes God. Okay, Moses is standing literally in God's place. Who becomes the mouthpiece of Moses? Who speaks for him? Because Moses did not talk to Pharaoh. You ever go back and look at the scriptures? When we get the details, Moses would speak, but who actually spoke to Pharaoh? Aaron. Aaron becomes Moses' mouthpiece, standing in the place of God. God doesn't talk to who is the picture. It's actually giving Pharaoh a very important message, because who did Pharaoh think he was? Pharaoh thinks he's God on earth. Here is Moses, who will not talk directly to Pharaoh. He only talks through Aaron. I'm not on the same level as you, Pharaoh. I can't talk to you. Who is Aaron in relation to Moses? His brother, right? Who's his mother then? Jochebed. What has Jochebed now providentially been doing? Preparing the two men who will what? Lead Israel. By the way, who becomes the leader of the women of Israel? We'll talk about her next anyway. Miriam. Who is Miriam in relation to Aaron and Moses? Their sister, the one that watched over him at the river. You see this whole thing. Jochebed has had the influence that's going to lead a nation. And when you think about the leadership now, Miriam's the one who leads the women. What does Aaron's role become even after the Exodus? He stands and is the mouthpiece of Moses initially. What does he become later when the tabernacle is built? The high priest. He is the religious leader of the nation. What is Moses after the tabernacle is built? He's what we would refer to as a civil leader. He's the one who presents the law. Aaron's the one who carries out the religious part of the law. And we see this whole thing laid forth. You ever notice how important it is that God thought, though, that nothing would be passed down to give Moses anything that would look greater than him later? Moses had children, but what were his children not allowed to do? They weren't allowed to be priests. They weren't allowed to be leaders. Who takes over for Moses? The next leader of the nation. Joshua, son of Nun. He wasn't even part of Moses' family. So here is Jochebed getting the privilege of being the woman who has this kind of influence. Well, think about some things we can learn about her. First, the trial of her faith. We gave that whole picture just to get us back to this idea. Trials and difficulties. Think about the conditions in the first two chapters. Evidently, Miriam is the oldest of the children. She is born well in advance of the proclamation that Pharaoh made to kill the male children. Aaron is about 3 years older than Moses, and because we have no other indication, it would appear that that proclamation had not yet been made when Aaron was born. I don't know exactly when it is between the birth of Aaron and the birth of Moses, but somewhere in that 3-year period, what does Pharaoh do? He makes that proclamation. So think about now being a mother, if you would, for just a moment. The first trial of her faith, trusting in God. You're a mother, you're pregnant. They don't have sonograms, so you don't know if you're carrying a male or a female yet. But on the day of birth, you know there's been an edict made that if it's a male child, it is to be killed. Is that a trial of your faith? How much trust and confidence do you have in God? Think about what it took her to complete that pregnancy to start with at that point. And then on the day of birth, to make sure that there were no Egyptians present so that you could what? Keep that son alive. And then how hard would it be and how much of a trial would it be for you ladies to have a brand new baby, but you have to hide it? You can't let it be seen for 3 months. There's some work here. There's some trial. You think about that early on, the trial of her faith. And so Jochebed has enough trust and confidence in God, though, that even at 3 months, what does she do when the child gets to that age? She fashions an ark and makes it so that it will float on the water, and she places it in the water. Now, I'm not going to say that I don't think that Jochebed didn't know that the daughter of Pharaoh and other high-ranking Egyptian women came down to a certain place in the river to bathe and at certain times, and that she didn't plan putting it there. But still, how much faith would it have taken to lay that babe in that little ark and place that ark in that river, knowing that what might happen? And that, yes, God carried out his promise and his plan. Did Jochebed know that Moses was to be the leader of the nation? No. What did she know? She had a babe that was born, and in the King James Version, it says he was a goodly child. The New King James uses beautiful. Just to give some other ideas there, at verse 2, the ASV has goodly, the ESV has a fine child, King James has goodly, New King James has beautiful. What do you think those words really meant if you go look up the meaning of the Hebrew behind them? What kind of child was he? He wasn't ordinary. He was a goodly. There's something, I don't know what she saw. I'm sure part of it, if you ask Jochebed directly, was motherly pride. He's a special child. But even at this point, they know there's something about Moses to keep him alive. Think about that. What would happen during that 3 months if the Egyptians discovered Moses? He'd have been killed. Not only him, what else? You violated the law. What's most likely going to happen to the mother? Be killed as an example also. I mean, she's putting her life in danger for his life. And you see some real scare there. Think about the trials she faced for that. What about the foundation of her faith then? Think about how you had to build this. Here is Jochebed, and it's hard for us to do this. We read, and when we look at Hebrews 11 in the sermon this morning, you'll think about this maybe a little more. We read these names and we think how great some of these people were. Moses' parents, Moses himself, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, all the names we've already seen. Jochebed was a human being. She breathed air in and out just like you and I. She had feelings just like you and I. She had those problems to face, being in slavery, having the child, all of these things. She had them just like you and I. What was her faith like then? And now we go back to that. We've been trying to stress it, and you're going to hear it this morning. Faith is what? What is faith? And everybody's going to say belief. Okay, what is belief? Faith. Well, what is faith? Belief. Quit giving me the circle answer. Give me an answer. What is faith? Remember, we looked at Hebrews 11:1 in one of the sermons already. It's the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. It's a confidence and a conviction in a hope. You have to know it's going to happen. One of the ones I've used, and it's the easiest one I can think of to illustrate it. A tall building that is on fire. You know, back in the old days when they didn't have the ladders that would reach up there, how did the firemen rescue someone off the 3rd and 4th floor of a building when the 2nd floor was on fire and there's no way to get up the stairs to them? Remember those old big canvas mats? They would haul out something like a trampoline, but not near as springy. And they would stand down there, and you're up there, you're looking down, the 2nd floor is on fire. What can you not see? But you hear the firemen going, "We have it in place below your window. You jump, we'll catch you." What does it take? And I think this is where some people get the idea of a blind leap of faith. It takes faith knowing it's down there. I can't see it, but it's there. However, why do you think that? Well, what have they been doing for quite a while? And what have you probably seen illustrated somewhere? Them holding that and catching someone. This is not something unknown. There's evidence that it's happened in the past. You can hear the firemen down there telling you they have it. Therefore, you have what? It's not blind luck. It's a confidence that you hear them. In the middle of the night, it's a very, very dark night. You're lost. You know, you used to play it. We play it by doing a blindfold. What is that game we used to play with the blindfold on? And one person would hollow out Marco. And then you answer Polo. And you use that sound to try to find them. If you woke up in a place that had no light in the middle of the night and you need comfort, what's the most comforting thing? Think about a young child. Why do young children want lights left on? And when those lights go out, what do they holler for? Mama or daddy? And if they can hear their voice, what happens as soon as they start to hear the voice? They start to calm down. Because they have a confidence they're what? I can't see them, but they're there. Here is Jochebed. Does Jochebed have that kind of confidence in God? When's the last time, you think Jochebed here for a moment and how she's handing it off to Moses, when's the last time the children of Israel had actually heard from God prior to Moses at the burning bush? The last man that really had any of it was Joseph, who had died by the time you get Moses to the burning bush, some 430 years in the past. Give or take, depending on what actual dates you assign. But imagine, it's been 400 years since they had what? Heard from God. Yet Jochebed has enough faith to know that God is where? She and Amram. Because if they didn't, what would you not do? We use this many times in the New Testament. By the way, think about this. How long was it that God was, quote, quote, silent from the end of the Old Testament to the opening of the New? Another 400 years. God's been done this and shown them. But if they didn't have confidence, if they didn't have faith, God was there, Jochebed and Amram for the perfect example here, what would they not do? Take a look at the world today. If the government was to pass a law that said you could have exactly one child, and after one child, any other children would be aborted or killed at birth, how many people in this nation, unfortunately today, would say, hey, great? And you look at me and some people are like, oh, no, how many in this nation today would say that's a good idea? I think it's wonderful. If you don't think there aren't some that would do it, think about the woman that I've seen the picture of that wears a shirt that says, I'm proud of my abortion. You see, there's a picture there. How much confidence and faith did it take Jochebed to hide an infant for 3 months in the face of that kind of society? That's the picture we get. Well, where did that come from? Well, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Jacob handed it down to Levi. Levi handed it down on through to Amram. Amram and Jochebed had that foundation of the faith. In fact, just to show it, go over and look at the report. Go to Hebrews chapter 11 for a moment. Hebrews 11, we'll be down at verse 23. Now, it says, by faith, Moses, but it's not Moses' faith being spoken of in this verse. Verse 23, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents, because they saw he was a proper child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandment. What does that tell you? Just from that passage, what does that tell you about Jochebed? Did Jochebed know there was a God? Did Jochebed have faith in that God, that he was the Almighty of the universe? Well, there's an indication that yes, she did. Why? Because she wasn't afraid of whose command? Pharaoh's. What kind of power did Pharaoh have? Hannah, go ahead. You can use Joseph in the Technicolor Dreamcoat to answer the question. What kind of power did Pharaoh have? No, you're good, huh? If Pharaoh, the musical there has a passage or a line in it where if Pharaoh told a joke, you did what? You chuckled for days. It gives you the idea. If Pharaoh pronounced you, and we have an account back in Genesis, Joseph met two men who worked for Pharaoh. One of them was a butler, the other was a baker. Pharaoh sent you to jail. How much time did you get on your trial? About 30 seconds. Pharaoh lets you out of jail. You go back to being a butler. Pharaoh doesn't like you as a baker, and what happens? You lose your head. Pharaoh had that kind of power. Here, Pharaoh's made the pronunciation, but you know there's somebody greater than Pharaoh. Now, that's something that in Egypt would have been, as we would say, been blasphemous according to their stuff. Because who was Pharaoh by the Egyptian definition? You ever look at some of the pictures that are taken out of the tombs, you always see Pharaoh drawn as being Ra. Who is Ra, if you think about that in Egyptian mythology? Ra is the sun. Who's the ruler of everything? If you just put religion aside for just a moment, think about it using your thing. Who is the ruling body of everything that we see and know in this universe? Physically. As we're going to find out later this afternoon, when he's up and strong, how hot is it? Who chases away the darkness? Who burns off the fog? Who brings this? Who does this? Why do we get scared when it's humid and gets hot and then the wind starts to blow? Because that heat's causing that air to rise, and then that air can start to spin, and we all get those favorite things we all know and love. Tornadoes come, right? Ra is the ultimate of the gods. Pharaoh is often likened to Ra. Therefore, to say there's someone greater than you, Jochebed has that in her mind. You think that doesn't happen later? God uses the same thing. Why does God perform the 10 plagues that he does? And somebody says, well, to convince Pharaoh. Well, yeah, but do you notice that he takes on, each one of those takes on at least one Egyptian god directly? For example, is Ra taken on face to face later on by God through Moses? How is that done? Which one of the plagues? There was darkness for 3 days. What did Ra lose? His power. And so we see this picture that even now Jochebed knows there's someone greater than Pharaoh. She has that kind of foundation to her faith. The next one, thinking about Jochebed for a moment, the exercise of her faith. Is this important? There are a lot of people that claim today they have faith in God. And in fact, there are many that will claim you are saved by what? Now, we can go out and I can find you all kinds of different ways of salvation, but in this case, saved by faith and by faith alone. Was Jochebed saved by faith alone? Oh, I have faith there's one greater than Pharaoh. You know what? Even though the child's 3 months old and it's getting real hard to hide him, I'm just going to leave him sitting right here in the house and everything's going to be fine because I have faith in God. What would have happened had Jochebed said, I just have faith, and just kept Moses right there in the house? Both of them probably would have lost their lives, because eventually the guards of Pharaoh would have what? Discovered the child. Because where did the daughter of Pharaoh not go? Now's where we see how God and us work together sometimes. Where did the daughter of Pharaoh not? She didn't go into the Hebrew villages. Where did she go? Down at a certain place at the river to bathe. Where did Jochebed put this ark? And you notice she didn't just throw the baby out in the water. What did she do? God did his part. Jochebed had to do what? Her part, what she could do. I can build an ark. I can make it waterproof. I can put the baby in it. I can put the baby near the spot where Pharaoh's daughter comes to wash. There's a chance. The moment she put him in the river, what did she have to do? At that point, she had to let go. It's in whose hands? God's. But to that point, she had to have that faith that had to be exercised. To say we're saved by faith alone would be equivalent to her, well, I don't need to build an ark. I'll just throw the kid in the river and he'll be fine. What happens to a 3-month-old if you throw him into the river with nothing to help them otherwise? You see, there's the picture. Exercise of faith. I have to have faith in God. He's going to do something, but I have to do the part that adjusts to that I can do. And so you see that part. God's going to save him. Did she have an example of that she probably heard the stories of in the past? What had Abraham done? Remember, Abraham had to take Isaac up on top of that mountain and lay him on the thing and lift the knife. Why was Abraham willing to even do that with Isaac? Because Abraham had the faith, the confidence in God that said, if he does, he can raise him up, because he's promised me that nation's coming through this son. Do you think that wasn't passed down? You think Isaac didn't tell his own children, one day your granddad took me up on top of the mountain? But do I think that Isaac related in a way? Because if you were 13 roughly years old, and some guy that's 113 years old starts to tie you up, how much faith do you have? Do you think that was related down through time, that Jochebed had heard stories like this? And she says, if this child is chosen by God and I get him into the river where Pharaoh's daughter might find him, there's a what? Chance. What happens if you never actually take? And that's the picture that's being done. God responds to her faith and gives her a reward of her faith. You think about his response. The daughter of Pharaoh comes at the right time to the right place, and the right things happen. Who controlled that? Now, do I think that means God put his finger on the daughter of Pharaoh and made her come? Not necessarily. How powerful is God? See, that becomes the problem. God probably ensured that the right training was given to the daughter of Pharaoh years before, when she was born, to make her what? Go back and read the passage again for a moment. Look at verse 6. Unfortunately, the daughters of the Egyptians were usually raised by the women and not by the men, because think about the kind of effect Pharaoh would have had directly. Verse 6, and when she opened it, she, that is Pharaoh's daughter, saw the child, and behold, the babe wept, and she had what? Compassion. Where did the daughter of Pharaoh learn to have compassion? I don't know. It doesn't tell us. But is that something you do learn? What would if this had been the son of Pharaoh, what would have been the likely immediate response? Moses would have been killed. Why? What would the son of Pharaoh not have been trained to have? Compassion. So there's providence of God working through Pharaoh's daughter. She had to be prepared to come that day. When did God start working to make this happen with Jochebed? The response for her faith, the reward of her faith. you see Jochebed going on. What kind of reward does she get? What do you think? I don't know how long she lived when she actually died for the moment. But imagine what it's going to be like on the day of judgment when Jochebed, along with all the others of the faith, are there, and she sees Miriam, who became a great leader of the women of the nation, and she sees Aaron, who became the first high priest, and she sees Moses, who has already spent 40 days on top of a mountain in the presence of God and been the leader of a nation. What kind of motherly pride does that give you for a moment? And that's the kind of thing that's the reward of her faith, probably more than just her faith, that she did the things that are going to get her to heaven. Seeing the outcome of what her faith produced is going to be an even greater reward for her. And that's really where we're coming up on time. Anybody have any other thoughts or comments this morning? If not, next week we'll look closer at Miriam next week. Thank you.